A few days ago, Apple unveiled its new M5 chip in the most anticlimactic way possible, with a press release. No event, no streaming, just a block of text on its website. For a company that has perfected the art of the presentation, the silence felt strange, and the question immediately arose: why? At first glance, the decision seems contradictory. Apple has built its identity around the thrill of the announcement, the carefully orchestrated expectation that transforms a chip or a laptop into a cultural phenomenon. But this time there were no lights, no applause, no stage. And behind that absence hides a deeper story, one that says a lot about the current state of the tech industry and Apple's place within it. Innovation, that word that defines an entire era, doesn't feel the same anymore. Phones, tablets, and computers have reached a level of maturity that makes each new generation less surprising. The improvements are real, but they are increasingly subtle. The market is changing, and with it, expectations. What used to be an annual revolution is turning into a constant, quiet evolution. The M5 chip embodies this new reality. In technical terms, it is an impressive achievement. It quadruples performance in artificial intelligence tasks compared to the M4, increases the unified memory bandwidth to 153 GB per second, and introduces neural accelerators in every GPU core. But outside the labs and engineering forums, those numbers lose their impact. For the average user who is still using an M1 or M2 MacBook without any trouble, they don't represent an immediate reason to upgrade. And when the public stops feeling the excitement, the show ceases to make sense. Added to this is an obstacle that Apple can no longer control: leaks. Weeks before the announcement, Mark Gurman of Bloomberg, one of the most reliable sources on Apple's internal plans, anticipated there would be no October event. According to him, the updates simply didn't justify a media spectacle. Then, from Russia, the well-known YouTuber Wilsacom leaked actual M5 iPad Pro units and posted full videos before the official announcement. In an age where every employee carries a camera in their pocket and supply chains span continents, absolute secrecy becomes impossible, even for Apple. And when the sense of awe is no longer possible, silence turns into a strategy. The discreet launch of the M5 is not an act of resignation, but a calculated maneuver. In recent years, Apple has begun to move away from its rigid launch calendar. Some products, like the iPad Pro or the Mac Studio, are no longer updated annually. Others, like the HomePod Mini, haven't received significant changes in years. What was once a hard rule is becoming flexibility. Apple is redefining the pace of its own innovation, adjusting product cycles to their true technical value, not to the marketing calendar. This strategy is not new in the company's history. Before the rise of the iPhone, Apple computers were updated unceremoniously in irregular cycles. In a way, the M5 marks a return to that more sober model. It is an important update, but not a revolutionary one, a piece that keeps the line fresh while the company prepares for something much bigger. Everything suggests that Apple is reserving its media firepower for the next major leap, the M6. According to reports from Gurman and analyst Ming-Chi Kuo, the MacBook Pro with the M6 chip will bring a complete overhaul. Haptic OLED displays, a thinner design, the removal of the notch, and the possible inclusion of cellular connectivity. That product would have the necessary weight to justify a full event, with all the spectacle we are used to from Apple. Therefore, going quiet now may be a strategically intelligent narrative decision. By not elevating expectations for the M5, Apple prepares the ground for the M6 to look like a true return to the magic. But there is another more practical reason behind the change. Apple events are multi-million-dollar productions that involve months of preparation, rehearsals, and global coordination. When the product being presented does not radically change the user experience, the return on that investment becomes questionable. In a scenario where technical details are already leaking weeks in advance, spending millions to recreate a surprise that no longer exists is simply unnecessary. And let's be honest, Apple no longer needs so much noise to sell. Its user base is so solid, its ecosystem so integrated that the products promote themselves almost by inertia. The M5 shows up in reviews, in comparisons, and on YouTube channels. The community's multiplier effect is enough to sustain interest without a spectacular event. Apple understands that its brand no longer needs to shout to be heard. Leaks, however, remain a challenge. It's an open secret that many of the videos circulating before launch come from factories in Asia, or from distributors who gain access to inventory early. In a global ecosystem with thousands of workers and complex logistics chains, total control becomes impossible. In that sense, the silence is a considered decision. Apple no longer needs to demonstrate its strength with big spectacles. It now prefers to use it carefully, precisely, only when it truly matters. Beyond appearances, the M5 represents something much bigger than a simple update. At the heart of its architecture lies the next chapter of Apple's strategy: on-device artificial intelligence. While companies like Google or Microsoft are betting on cloud computing and gigantic language models that rely on remote servers, Apple is taking a different path. It is building an AI infrastructure that functions directly on the user's hardware, without a connection, without transferring personal data, and without compromising privacy. With its enormous memory bandwidth and integrated neural accelerators, the M5 can run language models and image processing completely locally. This not only reduces dependence on external services, but also reinforces one of the pillars of Apple's philosophy: user control and privacy. It is a quieter gamble, but also a more enduring one. It does not seek to dominate public discourse with promises of magical artificial intelligence, but rather to create the infrastructure upon which that magic will be possible in the coming years. That vision, however, clashes with the perception of the average consumer. For many users, their MacBooks with M1 or M2 chips still run with the same fluidity as the day they bought them. The need to upgrade becomes hazy, almost non-existent. Apple has manufactured products so good that the incentive to change is no longer technical, but emotional. And when the excitement fades, the pressure to maintain an annual spectacle loses meaning. Paradoxically, Apple becomes a victim of its own success. The quiet launch of the M5 is also seen as a recognition of this maturity. Instead of trying to disguise an incremental advance with fireworks, the company opts for honesty. It presents the product, releases the data, and lets the engineers and specialized users discover its merits for themselves. The industry in general faces the same dilemma. Samsung, Microsoft, and Google all deal with an increasingly incremental innovation cycle. Smartphones, laptops, even cars evolve in a similar way. Small improvements every year and major leaps every so often. But Apple, more than anyone, carries the weight of an almost mythical expectation. For years, it accustomed us to expecting miracles. Now it seems to be accepting that magic cannot be a routine. What we see with the M5 could mark the beginning of a new stage, one in which Apple launches important updates discreetly and reserves the grand stages for the true generational leaps. Apple's next big moment will arrive with the M6. If it delivers on its promises and debuts at a full-scale event, the strategy of silence will have been worth it. Expectations controlled, resources conserved, and an audience ready to be amazed again. But if the M6 also arrives without fanfare, that could signal a deeper shift, one in which Apple recognizes that the era of grand revelations has ended, and that true innovation is now measured in consistency, not surprise. In the end, the silent launch of the M5 reveals an uncomfortable truth about modern technology. Perhaps it is no longer reasonable to expect annual revolutions. Our devices are so advanced that any visible improvement feels minor. The computers are powerful, the phones are brilliant, the chips are impressive. And if everything already works so well, what more is there left to reinvent?